I was Claire Hart before I became someone else's echo. Small town, smaller dreams, at least according to my father, who measured possibility by the calluses on his hands and the debt that followed our family like a faithful dog. Richard Hart worked the factory floor and came home smelling of machine oil and disappointment. My mother Ellen moved through our house like a ghost of her former self, the woman who'd once painted watercolors now relegated to painting over water stains on the kitchen ceiling. Ben was my twin by 5 minutes and the sun around which our parents orbited. Golden Boy, they called him, and he wore the title like armor. Where Ben got encouragement, I got warnings. Where Ben got opportunities, I got lectures about staying in my lane. But I had John. Jonathan Reed lived 2 streets over and moved like poetry through a world that didn't deserve him. He carried a camera everywhere, capturing moments the rest of us walked past without seeing. Film school by the ocean, he'd whisper during lunch. Director's chair someday. A door out of this town that won't swing back. I watched him from across crowded rooms and memorized the constellation of freckles across his nose. I saved quarters by skipping breakfast for 3 months and bought a heart-shaped box of chocolates for his 17th birthday. He looked at it, at me, at the crowd of classmates watching us like we were dinner theater. "Thanks, Claire," he said, setting the box down on the lunch table. Somebody laughed. A heel came down on red cardboard. Chocolate dust fanned across cafeteria tile while my face tried to memorize neutral. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor with Elmer's glue and infinite patience, piecing together every fragment. Not because I thought it would matter, but because I needed it whole again. Because some things deserve to survive their breaking. The morning of the SATs, I woke to the metallic click of a lock. No college. My father's voice carried through my bedroom door as if the wood wanted to help him. Factory. Debt paid. End of story. Ben banged on the bathroom door, looking for his good shirt. The shirt I'd ironed for him the night before, the one that would carry him to his test while I listened to my future crumble from behind a locked door. I pounded on the wood until my palms bloomed red. I promised everything, my wages, my future, my willingness to disappear entirely if he'd only let me sit for a test. I wasn't asking for the moon, just the chance to reach for it. That's when she came. Vivian arrived in the space between one heartbeat and the next. There's no clean way to explain what happened. One moment, I was Claire, desperate and trapped, and then something slid into my bones like new wiring. The world tilted, clicked, and suddenly I was watching from somewhere dark and quiet while someone else picked up my life. She moved with a certainty I'd never owned. The steel stool in the corner, I'd walked past it 1,000 times without seeing its potential. Vivian tested its weight with one hand and centered the blow precisely at the lock's weakest point. The wood tore like paper. Richard stumbled backward with a shock I'd never seen on his face, as if a mirror had shattered and the reflection refused to be contained. "I'm taking the test," Vivian said through my mouth, and walked past him without looking back. At the testing center, she didn't so much work the problems as solve the page. In the math section, her pencil moved like it had already known the answers. When the proctor called time, she set down her pencil with the satisfied air of someone who'd just won a game everyone else thought was impossible. The scores posted 6 weeks later. First in the state. Full scholarship offers arrived like snow. By then, she'd moved us into a downtown hotel with white duvets and a lobby that smelled like citrus and money. She'd filed a bug report to Microsoft, cashed the bounty, and paid for the room in full. When reporters came looking for the prodigy with the tragic origin story, they found only a father with explanations that made him look worse with every word. Richard Hart became a cautionary tale about parents who clipped their children's wings, while Vivian soared. The music started accidentally. Vivian borrowed a guitar from Mrs. Chen next door, promising to return it soon, a lie we both knew she had no intention of keeping. She played in the hotel room's kitchenette after midnight, steam from the kettle rising like breath in the dim light. I watched from my quiet corner as her fingers found chords I didn't know I knew. The melody that emerged was honey scraped over gravel, sweet and rough and utterly captivating. When sweetness ends, when sugar turns to salt, when the mirror shows what isn't your fault, you can break the glass or learn to see. The cracks are just light trying to be free. She recorded it on John's phone. Yes, John had found us by then, drawn by curiosity and something deeper he couldn't name. One song, uploaded to a friend's SoundCloud account, and suddenly the world was paying attention. When Sweetness Ends burned across the country like dry grass in August. The first time I heard it played on actual radio, through the speakers of John's car as we drove to another interview, I understood how a life could change in under 4 minutes. But it wasn't my life changing. It was hers. John became my manager because he understood Vivian's rhythms and because he loved her with a devotion that made my chest ache. He'd grown into his height by then, the awkward boy from high school now moving with the quiet confidence of someone who'd found his purpose. When Vivian looked at him in that hotel parking lot after her first real performance and said, "If you're coming with me, keep up," John smiled like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to talk to him that way. They didn't hide their relationship. On a red carpet where the cameras made the air shimmer with heat, Vivian looked directly into a lens as if it were a person and announced she'd married John when she turned 23. The crowd screamed. Industry people shook their heads like this was arrogance dressed as romance. But confidence looks like prophecy right up until it comes true. I sent them both my blessings from the dark. That's not a metaphor. The place where I existed had no edges, only the steady hum of everything happening without me. I didn't hate her. Hate implies rivalry, and what rivalry could there be? I admired her ruthlessness on my behalf, the way she wielded my face like a weapon, and my voice like a prayer. Vivian wrote songs that made people cry in their cars. She gave interviews where every answer sounded quotable. She wore red dresses to award shows and looked like she belonged under those lights. John documented it all, his camera capturing moments that would later become the foundation of something neither of them could have imagined. My 23rd birthday fell on a Tuesday that felt like destiny. The ballroom's chandeliers looked like upside-down constellations, throwing diamonds of light across a crowd that held its collective breath. Vivian had been different all day, distracted, almost nervous, which should have been my first warning. John knelt as the opening notes of When Sweetness Ends played through hidden speakers. The ring caught light and turned it into something I could taste, brilliant and sharp and impossible. "Vivian," he said, and his voice carried across a silence so complete it felt sacred. "Will you marry me?" The crowd started chanting, "Marry him, marry him, marry him." Then, the rope snapped. Gravity returned with the violence of a car crash. I was suddenly, brutally, completely myself again. Claire Hart, the softer version, the one who flinched instead of advancing, who asked instead of taking. I stood there, feeling thousands of eyes scraping against my skin, looking for an explanation I couldn't give. Panic talks with your legs. Mine ran. John found me in the hotel stairwell, my red dress torn at the knee, my carefully styled hair falling in my face like a curtain I wanted to hide behind. "You've changed," he said, and I heard the real question underneath. "Who are you?" I had no answer that wasn't an insult to both of us. I did what frightened animals do. I made myself small again. Except, the life around me wasn't small. It was a machine that needed constant feeding contracts and rehearsals, a body that was supposed to open its mouth and produce a voice that had never been mine, not really. The morning after a night I will not describe in detail, because intimacy is currency, and I have paid enough. John left a bowl of porridge and a plate of anchovies on the kitchen table with a note, "Rehearsal at 6. Don't be late." Vivian had loved fish. The slick salt of it made me gag. I ate it anyway and texted John to cancel the New Year's gig. He wrote back immediately, "Are you sure?" I typed yes and braced for the explosion that never came. "Okay," he said. "I'll handle it." Only later did I discover that Vivian had insisted on exit clauses in every contract, escape hatches hidden in the fine print. She'd left me doors in every room, even the ones she'd never expected me to need. The internet loved our drama the way fire loves oxygen. Someone leaked footage of John and me arguing in a hotel hallway, and hashtags rose like emergency flares, Claire quits, and sweetness ends for real. John handled the calls until his voice went hoarse. When he came home each night, he smelled like rain and exhaustion, and he hugged me the way you hold a person who is also a problem. "We'll go west," he said finally, and the "we" didn't have sharp edges. "We'll drive. You'll breathe." The camper van had a bed that folded down and cabinets that latched with a satisfying click. John lined everything in drawer paper because his sense of order was the only god he trusted anymore. We crossed state lines while the road wrote stories across the map. At gas stations, people recognized me Vivian's me and asked for photos. I smiled until my cheeks ached, playing a role I'd never auditioned for. John took pictures of me under vast skies and posted them with captions that sounded like gratitude but read like evidence. Look, the subtext said, "She's still here. We're still us." But we weren't. At Everest Base Camp, the mountain looked like a mathematical certainty. The air thinned until breathing felt like an argument I was losing. "No permits," John said, grinning with a wildness I'd never seen before. "We just look." He pointed at the summit the way men point at the future. "Someday we'll climb it together. I promised you." He had promised her. That night, his phone blinked with a notification, a small lighthouse on the nightstand. I told myself not to read it, then read it anyway. "So, are you proposing again or not?" Miles, his oldest friend, the person who could ask him anything. "She feels different," John had written earlier. "Like she's not the same Claire." I stared at the word different until it dissolved into meaningless shapes. My throat closed around a sob that had nowhere to go. I cried without sound because some habits never die, they just change addresses. By dawn, I had a decision that made my ribcage feel too small for my heart. I texted Ethan Myers, who'd shared my desk in sophomore English and now wore a white coat with his name embroidered in blue thread. "Hypnosis. Please." "Are you sure?" "Yes." I locked my phone before I could unchoose it. When I rolled over, John was awake, watching me with the kind of stillness that makes a person look like a photograph. "Ethan Myers," he said, gravel in his voice. "From high school." Suspicion is a flavor, it coats everything it touches. I picked up his phone and showed him the conversation with Miles. I wasn't trying to hurt him, just level the playing field, but fairness and cruelty often wear the same face. His expression shifted. I watched pride break and then brace itself for impact. "Let me go," I said. "If it works, I come back and we put everything back the way it was. If it doesn't, I didn't finish." We both heard the rest. If it doesn't, we say goodbye. On the way east, John refused to stop driving. Some men believe endurance is proof of love, and John was drowning in the need to prove something to me, to himself, to the universe that had stolen his fiancée and replaced her with a stranger wearing her face. The road unspooled like ribbon. A shadow moved at the edge of vision. A yak bolted from the roadside ditch, and John swore in a voice I'd never heard him use and jerked the wheel hard left. The van tilted, gravity took over, and glass exploded into confetti around us. When the world stopped spinning, I woke to the metallic sweetness of blood. John's head was against the steering wheel at an angle that screamed impossible things at my nervous system. I unbuckled myself with fingers that didn't feel like mine and dragged him through the only door we could pry open. My hands learned pressure points and bandaging with a speed that made me think Vivian had left me more than songs. "If I don't make it," he whispered through, lips split like overripe fruit, "go 10 miles west. There's a village. You can make it." "I'm not her," I said, and the admission tasted like failure and truth mixed together. "But I won't leave you." His hand went slack in mine. A truck driver with a radio and a wife who later sent me soup found us 3 hours later. Is less than #0. 6 is greater than. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and the particular grief of fluorescent lights. The doctors used words that moved in careful circles: significant injury, diffuse axonal, vegetative state, tomorrow or never. I learned how to talk to someone who might hear and might not. I read John the comments under his Instagram posts, the one where I'm laughing in an alpine meadow, grass so green it only happens at altitude. I told him about the nurse with a wave tattoo on her wrist, about how his mother touched the doorframe each time she entered, as if bargaining with a god of thresholds. Ethan flew in from Denver. He darkened a room and spoke in a voice designed to walk me toward doors in my own head. We recreated the morning my father locked me away, the anger and fear and the part of my brain that catalogs exits. We built a stage inside my skull and waited for Vivian to step onto it. She didn't. "She won't come unless she chooses," Ethan said finally, packing his equipment with the defeated air of a magician whose tricks had failed. "And I don't think she's choosing you right now." So I did. The only thing left, I lived. I went to every peak Vivian had circled on our maps. I hired instructors who taught me knots and how to read weather in the color of distant clouds. I learned to coax flames from damp wood and to admit when I couldn't. I stood at the base of rock faces that made my stomach drop into my boots and put my hands on stone that still held the night's cold. Every summit felt like a letter I was writing to someone who might never read it. Everywhere I climbed, I carried stories back to John's hospital room. I kept thinking if I could make my life interesting enough, the narrative might wake him. 3 months later, a package arrived at my hotel in Switzerland. Ethan's handwriting on the return address, a DVD inside, who even sends those anymore? And a note asking for permission to use a few songs. I slid the disc into John's laptop. The film opened on When Sweetness Ends. Vivian's voice cut through the speakers and straight through whatever I'd built around my heart. The story unfolded like a fever dream, our story, translated through metaphor and mercy. A couple undone not by betrayal but by a shift in gravity. A woman who was the same person and not. A man who loved her through both versions. I cried the way you cry when you recognize yourself in a mirror and don't want to. The credits rolled, directed by Jonathan Reed. A knock at the door interrupted my breakdown. I opened it, expecting housekeeping, and found John instead, alive, scarred, holding a ring that looked like a stolen star. Behind him stood Ethan, Miles, and half a dozen climbers I recognized from base camp, all of them grinning like we'd just reached a summit. "Claire," he said, steady as bedrock. "Marry me." I didn't ask how he'd woken up. I didn't ask why he'd come here instead of calling. I fell into his arms because sometimes survival is just consent to joy. We married in a building with tall windows that turned afternoon light into something holy. John had made a film that people passed to each other like a secret they cried in dark theaters and left feeling like they'd learned something about forgiveness. The box office broke records because sometimes a story finds its exact moment, and that's as close to magic as art gets. When I went into labor 2 years later, the world compressed to a single corridor of pain, and then exploded into light. Under anesthesia, I found myself in a place I'd never been, but always carried a palace built from memory and music. Columns made of sheet music and lines of code. Doors that opened without resistance. And on a table, waiting like it had been there forever, a letter in handwriting I'd never practiced but somehow recognized. "Claire, if you're reading this, congratulations. You built a life with John that I could never have sustained. I wasn't meant to last. I was born the night your father decided fear would be your language, and you refused to learn it. You set down your gifts because they made you a target, so I picked them up and ran. I chased John. I wrote songs. I taught you how to break down doors. But I'm a thunderclap, not a climate. I left before I could shatter what we were building together. I left you everything I learned: music, code, courage. The knowledge that locked doors are just suggestions. Live for both of us. Vivian. When I woke, John was holding our daughter, who had his mouth and my eyes and a grip that already refused to let go of anything she wanted. "Why are you crying?" he asked, wiping my face with his thumb. "She's perfect." She was. She is. Epilogue. Sometimes at night I hear thunder and feel the echo of someone else's courage in my bones. I don't pretend it isn't there. I also don't pretend I'm anyone but myself. I keep that small, ugly, heart-shaped box on my dresser, chocolate dust still clinging to one cracked hinge. The glue lines show if you look closely, and I like that. Nothing worth keeping comes without evidence of having been kept. Maybe Vivian stole my life. Maybe she saved it. Maybe both things can be true at once. All I know is that when John whispers, "I love you," into the dark and our daughter sighs in her sleep and the house settles around us like hands on shoulders, I can answer as the only person left in this body. "I love you too," I say, and the voice that responds is finally completely mine.